We come real-time technology. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs for Real-Time Technology. We're going to be making a presentation for you today about critical infrastructure protection and the technologies that may help you assist in mitigating any threats that might befall you. Now, we know that there are numerous threats out there, and many of the threats that befall us are because of unknown identities. So today, we're going to be talking about managing that part of the risk, trying to mitigate the risk through technology, and some of the case studies and the successes that we have seen, specifically in the Secure Worker Access Consortium program, SWAC, in the Port Authority, that Dan happens to be one of the founders of and operates the software for. We know that risk comes from those that wish to do us harm. We know that natural disasters, like Katrina, I don't know how many people from down south have responded to Katrina or had some responsibility. I was a first responder as part of the command team from New Jersey that responded down there. We know that there was difficulty, not only in critical infrastructure protection from incidents like Hurricane Sandy that we're still feeling the effects of up in the north, specifically New Jersey, but also how are you getting people back in? How are you managing those that are trying to get in and out of these crisis reentry areas? But the sheriffs down there, being a former member of the Board of Directors of the National Sheriff's Association, told me that there were some of the chiefs were still getting letters of access, printed letters of access to their Department of Public Works, for instance, to get back into these evacuated areas. Unknown people coming back into our areas. Unknown people and entities coming in and out of our facilities every day are potential threats. Do you know who the people are who are coming into your facility? You have methodologies in place and technologies in place to be a force multiplier to your staff. I don't believe in technology as the only thing. Technology, to me, is one of the tools in our toolbox, and we want to talk about a couple of those tools today. So, I want to introduce Dan Grant. He's the CEO of Real-Time Technology Group, who's also one of the founders of SWAC that I mentioned before, and we are the proud recipients of the Homeland Security Gov Awards for the technologies we're going to speak about. So I give you Dan Grant.
Leo, thank you. It's an honor to work with you every day. And it's an honor to be here today as a speaker talking about some of the success stories that we've seen or developed really from the beginning at World Trade, the bridges, the airports, the tunnels, as well as launching new programs, particularly in Atlantic County and in California and in various points in between, where our mission is to build trusted communities. People who stand ready to support critical infrastructure, to re-enter a zone with the proper skill sets. It's one thing just to be an identity. It's another thing to need to be there. So that's what we're discussing today. That's what we specialize in and really focus on in supporting the law enforcement, emergency management, public safety organizations throughout the country to securely collect that personal information. Because this is, now we're talking about personal information about lots of people that we care about. Establishing standards that not only build that trusted community and the integrity of that community, but protect you as emergency management officials, public safety officials, in developing and implementing this type of program. And lastly, how do we assure compliance? It's very easy to whip out that good-looking card and flash and pass your way in anywhere you want to go. I'm in awe in many places that Sheriff McGuire and I go, where he sticks out his big police chin and his broad shoulders, says, "How you doing?" And boom, we're right in the door without anything. It's almost scary. So what we've learned to do and what we've specialized in is securely and privately enrolling people, protecting that personal information. creating a holistic view of the broad range of identities that we have to deal with. It's not just police, fire, and EMS. We're the small community. The much bigger community that I like to call the expanded first responder community involves contractors, support workers, social workers, food service people, the truck drivers, the fuel tank drivers, the water delivery trucks, the Red Cross, people that come in to support these activities to help minimize the impact of an incident and expedite the response and cleanup of that incident so that we can return our communities back to normal day-to-day activities. It used to be that any law enforcement officer in this room would very easily pick out that fake ID that, not me, but many other people when I was in college had. In today's world, that's not the way it is. Today's world, you can order that ID that looks just like a real ID driver's license, and it may come from overseas. And to the naked eye, even a trained professional with the ID guidebook, the ID checking guidebook, is not going to know the difference between that ID and my New Jersey driver's license that's legitimate. This burgeoning industry in being able to order any kind of different government-issued ID you wish, with whatever information you wish to put on it, poses a very serious risk to all of our personnel assurance programs. You can't just trust that I'm Dan Krantz just because I said I am, and I produced a document that looks like a driver's license. In today's world, we have to be sure that we validate the information that we collect. We have a responsibility in running these types of programs and collecting that information securely and maintaining the integrity of that data so that it can be used in authentication. But step one becomes stop the faxes. We fax these pieces of paper all over the place with our social and our date of birth and our address history and the people we work for. This is sensitive information that can very easily be used to compromise a program. And a program without integrity of the identity information within it, I've shockingly told people that were prospective customers, don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. Because if we can't securely collect that information, and more importantly, validate it as being a truly authentic document, the image on the screen, for those who may not recognize it, is a very simple document authentication device that reads the security features within any government-issued ID to assure, via that security technologies that are embedded in legitimate cards, that this document is a legitimate document that I'm being presented. That enables us to then positively identify that person for entry to your schools, to your hospitals, to your critical infrastructure, your oil refineries, your utility plants, your bridges, your tunnels, your airports. World Trade is obviously the highest value terrorist target in the world, and all of this theory has been proved out and developed there over the last 7 years. My second rule to success in this type of program is to organize resources by who they're affiliated with. And not just who they're affiliated with, because just because I am who I say I am, does not mean that I need to be in Atlantic County after the evacuation has occurred and we're trying to clean up the mess. Has anybody in law enforcement experienced self-dispatch in the past?
I was first one out. Ready to go.
You know, I know when I was responding as an active responder, we listened to the scanners. We waited for the calls. We went places we weren't necessarily invited to come. All that does is extend the duration of the incident, the cost of the incident, the inefficiency of working that incident through to a successful conclusion. The second part of that, so you have affiliations with organizations, with private companies that support our daily operations. We all have specialized skill sets that keep us safe and enable us to do the tasks that we do without liability. Those are important things to track, to know not only is somebody who they say they are, but they belong here because they were called here, and they have the proper skill sets to perform the job that we need to have done. Sometimes this involves integrating third parties, your training academies, to assure the proper assignment of certifications to individuals. This whole view of an individual, of a person, creates a profile that is not just a name on a list, but an intelligent selection of individuals to expedite a response and minimize the impact of that event. All of this is kind of scary, right? You know, it's like we're going to collect personal information, we're going to know who's affiliated with who, we're going to know who does what, and when my CPR certification expires, I'm instantly going to be out. That's scary stuff. You're collecting and managing a lot of stuff and personal data. You're setting standards and criteria for access, which a defense attorney in the room would say is denying somebody their right to work. So what we do is to protect ourselves with standards that are already established and audit controls that prove compliance with those standards. So there's lots of standards that are already out there. There's Homeland Security presidential directives. There's FIPS data standards. There's CFRs related to national infrastructure protection that define clearly at the federal level what an individual should be, what that profile of that individual should look like in order to comply with federal recommendations, federal mandates, albeit unfunded mandates, federal mandates. This is an easy way, and we've defended successfully in court, to say, we don't set the criteria. We don't measure you against that criteria. We simply collect information, process it to third parties who are certifying authorities in that particular discipline, and enable the need to know sharing securely of that information with public safety officials for the purpose of securing a zone or allowing just the individuals we need back into a zone for expedited response and minimized impact. Our fourth rule is to empower our officers, our emergency responders, with accurate real-time information that's not on the card. My 12-year-old son could make any of the IDs that I carry and am issued by government authorities, and they'd look pretty darn good. They may not be operable the way or have the security features that are invisible to the eye that the real ID has, but in a flash and pass program, he'd get through, I'd say, 9 out of 10 times. So we empower our officers real-time information that does not disclose personal information, but rather somewhat privately says to that officer or that emergency responder or training safety officer on a scene, this individual meets the criteria to access this location at this moment in time. By making that a dynamic equation, at this moment in time, this location. Every location is different. I'm not here to tell you what you should do in your secured zones. That'd be crazy, because who am I to say what you should do to secure your facility? What I urge you to do with named people on named lists, because what we experienced in Atlantic County during Sandy, and part of what we're doing to launch a new program down there now, is everybody and their brother's on the list. The storm hits. They say to the security director at XYZ casino, send me your essential personnel. Okay, well, each casino has 400 essential personnel. How do we know who's on that list? How do we know that his drug dealer, his other undesirable individuals, to keep it clean, aren't on that list in the midst of all those other 400 people that do need to be there? We don't. And what that causes is more chaos at those entry points, a more difficult job for the public safety officers who are trying to do their best with the information that they're presented with to vet that community before allowing them back in. When we take affiliations or identities and affiliations and skill sets, and we make that all part of the equation, it's a lot harder to defraud. What can we expect as a result of implementing this type of program? It's most certainly going to improve our operational efficiency. We're real responders. We know that we act. Responders act. They're not going to stand in line waiting. So there has to be throughput. This has to be an operational tool that with a click of a scanner gives you that relevant information. We reduce the risk involved in those scenes for our own responders, for the community that supports us, what I call the expanded first responder community, and the community itself, that we're there to clean up and return to normalcy. We reduce the risk by assuring that people have a need to be there. Not just, I heard it on the scanner or on the news, and I'm a media person, and I want to get in behind the lines to see what's really going on. No. We also know that every department, whether it be police, fire, EMS, or any sort of other type of municipal organization, government agency, is under tremendous pressure to cut. Cut. Smaller budgets, less people, you don't need so many officers, why are you riding two in a car, why don't you just put the guy out there by himself? Yet we have trained police officers managing these records in Excel, trying to enter those training records, trying to recall those training records, trying to tell Sheriff McGuire when he's ready to recertify his handgun training, or his assault gun, or his long gun, or bloodborne pathogens, or excessive use of force. The list is long and distinguished. It's not manageable without a lot of administrative efforts. So what do we want to do? We want to take that trained officer away from that desk and put him back out in the community where he can do his job. By doing all this, we will clearly reduce the cost of that response, improve the cooperation that we have with that expanded community, and will maintain audit records for compliance, for reimbursement, for emergency funds. All of this record keeping is essential to following the procedures that we need to in the bureaucratic world in which we live. This is an operational tool, it's not aspirational. So when that responder comes to a scene, and I've lived this personally as a commanding officer, and you say, this is a confined space rescue, who's certified? You have mutual aid coming from different places. This is a hazardous event. We got hazardous materials, we have confined space. And you say, who's certified? Everybody jumps off the truck and says, ooh, pick me. I know the responders in my department, but I don't necessarily know the responders in your department. And this applies to big cities, it applies to rural areas. New York and World Trade is not the only target. Terrorism is not the only thing that we have to deal with every day. We have more than I can express hazardous chemicals shipped in rail cars around this country every day. Occasionally one of them falls off the track and leaves a cloud. It's not usually in a big city. In those more rural areas, we rely even more upon responders coming from different areas with specialized skills and equipment to manage that incident. When he comes off the truck, and we know who that person is, and we know they're not a threat in general, and we know they're a trained firefighter, we need to know that they don't have that specialized skill. Because, thank God, it never happened in any of my departments. But I know that when you look down the hole and there's a firefighter or a police officer, usually a cop, goes down the hole first. And he's laying in the bottom of the hole. And then a firefighter comes along and says, oh crap, that's my buddy, sheriff. And now we have 2 dead responders in the hole. And it's because they did things they weren't trained to do. We need to know this. I call this enhanced lockout tagout. We can arrive at a scene and pull a tag off our helmets and hang it on a board. How much more does it take to scan it with a barcode scanner? And know that we're deploying people properly. Is this going to occur when the blast first occurs and the first engines arrive? Not a chance. Because I'll be the first guy to knock that guy over and go rescue whoever needs to be rescued. But as these incidents grow in size and duration, we absolutely have to implement safety officers and skill set deployments. We have to assure compliance with what we know and are trained to be the safe, secure way to work. Risk reduction. We publish criteria for access to the program we run in New York. And we still found over 300 and counting. That's an old statistic actually from the end of last year. Over 300 and counting people paid $495 out of their pocket to be part of a program. When we can't match their name to their date of birth to their social, we call them. And we say, Ms. Maloney, we can't match your date of birth. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe somebody typed it backwards, 76 instead of 67. And they disappear off the face of the planet. We can't find them anymore. There's over 300 people that I'll go out on a limb and say, we're trying to defraud the program to get in the door. And that's after clearly published criteria of what we do. That's probably the most horrifying, but we've also found over 2,000 felons disqualified by the federal criteria, CFR 1572. We found open warrants. We found people that stole other people's identities. We had an identity theft case that was going for 13 years until they collided at World Trade, the real John Doe with the fake John Doe. But our systems look for those types of exceptions because we're actively collecting and monitoring that data and analyzing that data in real time so that we can provide actionable intelligence to the people that need to know. Law enforcement. We're not law enforcement. We analyze the data and we provide actionable intelligence. The real question becomes, if they're not working in any of the bridges, tunnels, airports, all of our transportation throughout the New York, New Jersey area, where are they working? Where'd they go? And if you're not doing these types of things, programs like mine are pushing those bad guys towards your facilities. The whole purpose is to expedite response and minimize the impact. Because ultimately, time is money. And we're all under those pressures to minimize the impact, to spend less money. Long access lines, when you're trying to re-enter that zone or that facility, do nothing but delay the responders from doing their work. We've got to get them in the door. We had, we'll just say county officials, tell us they couldn't even get their DPW guys in the door. Okay, well, those are the guys that really need to clear the streets so that we can perform the remediation that we need, and they couldn't get in because there's 10,000 residents and people that are trying to get in ahead of those people. We need a slow lane and an easy pass lane. You can't have an easy pass lane if you haven't validated that individual as being authentic to who they claim to be, that they need to be there because they're affiliated with an organization that is performing work at that facility or that crisis, and that they have the proper skill sets to work safely and securely, because we're responsible. We're responsible for managing the overall incident. We have too many responders. Sheriff's told me many times about an airplane fiasco at Teterboro, skidded off the runway, and when he arrived, there was, I don't know, 150 police cars there and 46 fire trucks, and the thing wasn't even on fire. It just skidded past the runway. The impact of that is great. It's not just cost, it's the image to the community that we're charged to protect and serve. Chaos increases the opportunity for subversive activities. So if we don't control this community, we're opening the door wide for the undesirable individual who's waiting with his fuel truck filled with fertilizer for the call for fuel trucks so that he can bring it in and gain unfettered access because his friend at the casino put him on the list. It's that simple in today's world. And we can't allow that anymore. When we started police work way back when, we used to walk the beat with batons. We were in the community. We were interacting with the community. The community knew we were there because we were on the street. And we pulled them off the street. Oops, excuse me. Pulled them off the street and we put them in cars. We detached them from the community. And we have less and less officers, so they have less and less time to make those visits to the local places where we gain actionable intelligence. Who in the community's messing up your store? We need to cooperate better, again, with that community. What this does is, A, take that officer who's on desk duty and put him back out on the street where he belongs, and B, establish an outreach with that expanded community that says, we're here to work together. And we want to know who you are. We want to know what you're good at. So when we get that call, we can call you to help us. That's not just big crises. There's specialized response that happens on a day-to-day basis to support public safety. You know, the crazy examples, the bee catchers, the alligator catchers, who you know that can wrestle an alligator. In the old days, at dispatch, we'd look over and say, hey, Sheriff, who do you know that can wrestle an alligator? We know that person is who he says he is. When we send that utility worker into somebody's home to turn off the gas meter, we know that that's a safe thing to do because we know he's going to go back later, and that's one of the more violent things that occurs in this world, people that fake that type of visit to a home. This is about establishing community ties, knowing who people are, knowing who we can rely upon, and utilizing them for standing up and saying, I'm willing to be part of that community. It satisfies the demand the public has for us to work efficiently and engage the community in our day-to-day operations. And I think it's a legitimate demand. That's what we're here for. And it's not just law enforcement, but any enterprise, organization, private organization that needs to better control access to their school, to their hospital, to their nursing home, to their chemical plant. It's really hard to do this on your own. What these programs enable is that trusted community that's shared by all, that eliminates the duplication of effort, of vetting contractors that work at all the different facilities. In New Jersey, I live right near Pharmaceutical Row, so 10 of them. Okay? Those organizations all use the same contractors pretty much to build and maintain and support their operations. Why can't we all work together and share that information? Eliminate the duplication of effort from corporation to corporation to corporation. You may compete with various corporations on Pharmaceutical Row, but none of us should be competing in terms of identifying people and ensuring the safety and security of our region, of our communities. We can work together via permission-based technologies that enable us to securely share information, that enable us to audit access to that information so that we know if somebody's misusing that information. If it's an audited system, it protects you for your liability of running this type of program. So we know who does what, where, when, why, how, and we can provide those records to security personnel as actionable intelligence. It's about sharing. It's about working together. It's about engaging the community around us to participate. We don't abuse people's personal information. We protect it. We now have 45 of the biggest unions in the country who embrace and endorse and are starting to enroll their entire membership, because by engaging the community, we've enabled them to not only be skilled workers, but known, skilled, threat-free workers. It improves their ability to support the market. It improves our ability to know that they're supporting us safely and securely. There's benefits for everyone. In cases where you don't comply with regulatory requirements, even though they're unfunded, you can get nailed really bad. $3.5 million because they were unable to produce training records for the FAA at an airport. So lastly, here's the action plan I would urge you to employ. Positively identify your communities. If you're not in law enforcement and dealing with responders to an incident, you're dealing with people that maintain and support your facilities, that build them, that maintain them, that serve food at them, that clean them at night. Anybody in corporate security knows that the fastest way to get into your facility is to buy your cleaning company. Because we let the cleaning people in there at night when we're all gone. We give them access to our desks and our files and our HVAC systems, our mechanical systems that support our facilities. You have to positively identify the community that works for you. You need to actively track their skill sets if they're environments where that's important. You need to identify the criteria, preferably from some federal organization, so you can pass the buck to somebody else and say, hey, the federal government says that I have to do this. And if anybody's familiar with the 18 sectors of the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, it's pretty much all of you for sure. It's education, it's healthcare, it's utilities, it's natural resources. It's not just the airports, bridges, tunnels, and world trade. It's all the things that make the economy of this country great. It's food. It's petroleum. It's chemicals. It's healthcare, education, etc. You have to identify the criteria that make sense for you. I'm not suggesting that everybody be certified in everything. We manage risk at different levels for different levels of risk. You need to identify the criteria that make sense for you. And lastly, you need to authenticate that access. Not by issuing an ID card that anybody can fake or defraud, but authenticating back to the original data source. Where's the protected data that we know is valid? That's the data that should be used for authenticating individuals' access rights. Thank you all for coming. I very much appreciate it. If you have questions or would like any further information, we're here for the next 2 days. We're on the show floor at booth 2810. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your attendance.